Hi everybody, welcome to Sunya IAS. Today we're going to start the paper 2 section B, that is related to forest ecology and ethnobotany. Okay, so those of you who are preparing for the Indian Forest Services 2023, you have been given access to this portion slightly earlier. But if you're preparing for 2024, you can take your own course, you can cover each portions one by one. Also, for 2023 aspirants, I just want to iterate that while you have been given access to both 2A and 2B and all these portions parallelly, if you want to complete these portions individually as well, you can, because at least in paper 2B, forest ecology and let's say protection, wildlife, all this, there is no direct overlap or connections with the other portions. Okay, so if you want to do them separately as well, or if you want to increase your speed, etc., for revisions, you can do so. Okay, that said, of course, we're talking about paper 2B, forest ecology and ethnobotany. After that, we will do a smaller portion, which is forest protection and wildlife biology, and then I'll move to other portions. Okay. So we will firstly see what are the topics here. Okay. I plan to cover this whole section in 3 lectures. In lecture number 1, I will be talking till this point, if you are able to see, right, from the forest ecology, the biotic, abiotic components, forest ecosystems, community concepts, vegetation, ecological succession and climax. Now here we have already covered it in silviculture, so all those theories will remain the same. However, I will take one previous year question here so that it, let's say, aids your understanding, right? Then I'll also talk about, let's say, primary productivity, nutrient cycling, etc., the water relations, physiology, stress environments, drought, water, logging. So there are some basic components which you have already read in your, let's say, environment in prelims, etc., but I will quickly go through that, right? In lecture 2, we will talk about identification, dendrology, taxonomy, and this herbaria and arboreta, because these are also the taxonomic classification. All these are very important, let's say, and these are the portions which you have not covered elsewhere also, right? So we'll also give some time in this part, then in the lecture, and also clonal plaques, right? And in the third lecture, we will talk about role of ethnobotany till this part, okay? Factors affecting action, and this is also a very interesting and a very high yielding, both lecture number 2 and lecture number 3. Okay, so all these 3 lectures will, in fact, from lecture number 1, relatively lesser questions are asked, at least this topic entirely. While they're asking you some questions, they're not that difficult, you'll also see that. But yes, from at least this portion, clonal parks, arboreta, herbarium, taxonomic classifications, and let's say the Indian traditional medicine system, etc., they ask you a lot of questions. Fine. So this is going to be the outline for this lecture, right? Then again, for example, here nutrient cycling is mentioned. This I've already taken up when I've in the forest soils. In that C cycle, let's say carbon cycle, nitrogen and VAM, all of that part has already been taken. So here I will not again just repeat that. The portions which are, let's say, still pending, for example, physiology in stress environment, drought, water, alkalinity, this part I will explain here in more detail. Okay. So we are talking about forest ecology. What is ecology? Anything which has logo or logos simply means a study. Okay. So ecology is a study or relationship between organisms and their environment. Okay. So what is forest ecology? You may write down. Okay. It is again a study of the organisms in a forest and their surrounding abiotic and physical environment. So it is the interaction. Here also the word ecology is preceded by forests. So it is going to talk about the study of the relationships between organisms and their abiotic or the physical environment, right? And then let's say this is the static part of it. This term ecology was coined by Ernst Haeckel in 1869. So this is one. Again, a second very much, let's say, basic concept here is related to a term known as levels of organization. So here also this thing you would have seen so many times in your prelims, right from individual to population, community, ecosystems, biome and biosphere. Sometimes they even ask you very basic questions also. So even if you get a question like this, again try to recall right from the whole sequence: individual, population, community, ecosystem, biome and biosphere. Out of this, the definition of ecosystem is the most important. Ecosystem is the structural and the functional part, okay, of biosphere. Now this term structural and functional was also asked that, let's say, what are the structural and the functional changes which happen because of ecological succession. That also I've covered here in this lecture. So that will also give you an understanding of what is let's say a structural component, and then what is, let's say, a functional component, right? Both these things are very much important, right? Structural component and a functional component, right? So these are few things that one needs to at least know about, right? So individual, population, community. Here, of course, you know, from a population to community, the number of variety of species changes, right? Wherein then you talk of ecosystem. A broader term is a biome, which again has let's say classifications based on the different portions of geography, right? So based on different climates, you have different biomes. For example, Delhi's biome will have multiple ecosystems within it. And then you have biosphere, which is nothing but an intersection of lithosphere, atmosphere, and hydrosphere. And the living part within that is known as biosphere, right? Now, your syllabus directly talks about biotic as well as abiotic factors. So let us quickly revise that also. Biotic means living, which can include fungus, plants, protista, okay, animals, bacteria, archaea, all these, let's say, components. Abiotic factors, now this we have done in so much of detail in silviculture, so I'm not going to expand too much of it, but I will tell you the kind of previous question which was asked from this. Okay, so air, so, let's say edaphic, water, humidity, pH, minerals. So many of these components are the biotic as well as abiotic factors, right? So in case, let's say, you want to think about soil, so yes, let's say lateritic soil supports a lot of variety species. Again, in forest soils, we've seen this in more detail. Water is very much essential. Again, let's say sunlight, temperature, air. Okay, all these things are self-explanatory. Now, here I want to again remind you a few terms which you have already seen. Okay, so there are terms like euro and steno. Okay, so you have heard of terms like eurohaline or terms like eurothermal, and then similarly stenohaline or stenothermal. Now, because I will also talk about what is the impact of these biotic as well as abiotic factors. So you need to know euro means something which has a big range. So when I say eurohaline, it means an organism which can withstand a long changes in temperature. Okay. So euro means which can withstand a longer range. Steno means a smaller range. S small, S steno. So eurohaline means they can withstand large changes in salinity. Stenohaline, less changes in salinity. Stenothermal, small changes in temperature. Eurothermal, large changes in temperature. Okay. So these are few things that you need to know. Very basic things, because temperature is mentioned, light is mentioned. Now again, when I mentioned light, think about what we had discussed. We had discussed about etiolation, which basically is the disfiguration or the discoloring which happens. Okay. Okay, so I think that is one thing we have already done. Other than that, you have, I think, etiolation I've already told you. Then there are two more terms. One is heliophytes, H-E-L-I-O. Helio means, helio is sun, you know, heliocentric orbit, etc. So heliophyte, phyte means loving. Okay. So here two more terms I'm telling you. Heliophytes, this is means something which is sun loving. Okay. And then you have sciophytes, S-C-I-O. This means shade loving. Okay, and one more time, I've already told you that was related to basically etiolation. So the yellowing of leaves because of absence of light. Okay, so that is one thing that you need to also know. Other than that, I think eurothermal, all these things I've already told you, right? So again, this is one part, this is biotic. The second part is, sorry, the previous part was abiotic, this is biotic. Now, for example, you can here also divide this in producers, consumers, and decomposers. So again, let's say you have plants, it can be Tectona grandis, it can be sol, it can be other grasses, etc., which actually create the food. They convert the sunlight into energy through a process known as photosynthesis. This also we have seen already. Animals like, let's say you have elephant, etc., that feed on the producers. Not just elephant, think about deers, all the other, let's say, herbivores. Okay, which are then taken. So you have primary consumers, you also have secondary and tertiary consumers as you move across a food chain, right? And then you have decomposers, which can be bacteria, fungus, slime molds, etc., which break down the detritus, which is the dead organic matter, right? So that is also one thing, let's say, which we have to know about. So these are the biotic factors. Now let us think about a question which was already asked. Okay. Forest ecology, studies the complex interactions between organic and inorganic components of the forest ecosystem. So now in your definition of forest ecology, I gave you one definition. This definition you can directly borrow from the previous question. So you can also write this definition down. Okay. Now see what they are asking you. This is a 8-mark question from 2018. Explain organic and inorganic components, providing 2 examples of each. Okay, not a difficult one. Okay. So for example, organic ones. So these are the living or the once living part of the forest ecosystem, right? So here I've given 2 examples for plants and 2 examples for animals also. And similarly, then we talk about inorganic as well. Okay. So for example, you have sal tree. Sal is what? Shoria robusta. Okay. So here it plays a very important role. We've seen many of these examples in habitat, in different ecosystem services, right? So here, let's say it plays a very important role because you have to relate these examples to the forest ecosystem. Okay. Similarly, bamboo or bambusa, by the way, we'll also see bamboo in more detail when I talk to you forest utilization. Okay. So found in Indian forest serves a very important source for these herbivores, etc. Right. So this is one example or 2 example of these plant species. Similarly for animals. Okay. You have the let's say Bengal tiger, an apex predator. You may also write down the case of vultures also. Okay. Second example, because see this is a apex predator and it is also a very important keystone species, which is why when if the population of these tigers will decline, the population of the prey, which means the deer, etc., will increase, which will cause a disbalance in the ecosystem, right? So we have to, this actually is very much important for keeping the population of herbivores in check. Okay. Similarly, we have the example of, let's say, giant Malabar squirrel. Okay. Now again, squirrels, etc., help in seed propagation, dispersal, promotion, etc. And this helps in forest regeneration. Again, here, if you are able to notice any important keyword, for example, forest regeneration, okay, or balancing the forest ecosystem, note the keywords down. Okay. Otherwise, this question is very, very easy, but then how you present it will make all the difference, right? Again, here, let's say in inorganic, you can write many, you can write all of these inorganic components, right? But I've chosen to write about soil and water, right? So here, let's say the first part is related to lateritic soils. You've read about this also. So these are parts found in parts of Western Ghats, okay? They support many of the, let's say, unique species which are adapted to its acidic nature. So this also directly supports the forest ecosystem, okay, luxuriant vegetation, etc. Second, you have alluvial soils, okay, though they are very much fertile, we already know. Doab and the fertile regions, the alluvium deposits, okay, and which supports very much Shisham, etc., Dalbergia Sisu. Then you have water. So here also, let's say, water streams in Himalayan forests provide a lot of habitat for these aquatic species. That's number 1. And similarly, you have Sundarbans, mangrove, etc., which is very much important for, let's say, the Sundari here tree, okay, the Sundari mangrove, or let's say the Royal Bengal tiger. So that also supports a very good important ecosystem. And we have been seeing Sundarbans overall in our lectures, right? So again, I'm just telling you, forest ecology, these kind of questions are getting asked in this, let's say, topic. Okay, so that is one. Then there are few terms which are also mentioned in your syllabus. Let's say you have forest community. Okay. Oh, I think the heading here should have been forest ecosystem also. Okay. So of what is a forest ecosystem? So please make this change. I think this should be the forest ecosystem, right? What was an ecosystem? A structural and a functional part of a biosphere. You'll also see this in more detail. Okay. So what is it? It is a dynamic entity in which you have different communities interacting with the physical environment. This is generally a definition which is given. Okay. So when I'm talking about forest ecosystems, we have seen Amazon rainforest, etc. So you have tropical rainforests, Western Ghats, Andaman, etc. So you can also think of Amazon. And even if you get a question like this, let's suppose you are less on content. And sometimes you might get a very basic kind of question. Always draw a map. You know the map of India. You can draw tropical rainforests across the areas, northeast, the parts of Western Ghats, etc. Okay, draw that, and also draw deciduous, okay, which can have, let's say, sal and teak. And here also, please do mention Shoria robusta, Tectona grandis when you write, let's say, deciduous, etc. Right? So this is one. Now we'll see a very important concept, that is of forest community. Okay. So first of all, we'll define what is a forest community. Then we will also see there are 2 things here. One is community characteristics, and then there is community characters. Okay, so three things we have to see here. Whatever forest community you have, okay, so for example, just give me a second. So let's say if I'm talking of a forest community, okay, again remember we have seen dominant, dominated, all those kind of, let's say, variations, grasses, shrubs, again some trees. So when I'm talking of a forest community, it will have some stratification. Stratification can be both horizontal and vertical, which means how the different trees, etc., are layered down, okay, or in which layer or in which arrangement they are there, okay. This also means that, of course, the ones which are at the top are getting the most nutrition. There is a lot of competition for energy, light, resources going on, okay. So in a forest community, you will have an interaction between these species. So there will be a stratification which will go on. Again, we have seen, for example, you have different forest types. So different niche will also be there. What is niche? Niche is a unique functional role that a species occupies. Unique functional role, okay. And when I say unique, which also means two species cannot have the same niche. So this is the unique functional role. Fine. Now, so of course you have your trees, etc., which are there, okay. So I've used two things. One is community characteristics and one is community characters, okay. So think of it from simple perspective. Community characteristics are the broad macro perspective, okay. So if you want to see the overall health of an ecosystem, there will be some parameters. So think of community characteristics as broad and community characters as micro or more detailed in nature, okay. They are very specific to an ecosystem, okay. So here we will talk about these three things, right? So of course, forest community, you have plants and animals living together and they're interacting. There is stratification. There are different layers, canopy, understory, forest floor. We have already seen these terms in anatomy lecture and in other portions. You have a niche, which means, for example, Bengal tiger will have a particular niche. Similarly, herbivore will have its own niche, okay? So these are the terms. And again, if you get this kind of a question, do use these terms. And then community characteristics. So these are the broader features I told you, right? They are macroscopic, okay, which tell you the structure and functioning. One term you will be noticing again and again. This term they're asking you again and again. Structure, function, structure, function. They've asked you also very shortly, I'll tell you. But always think, okay, there is a structure and there is a function. For example, the structure can be understood by stratification and niche. Function can be understood by, let's say, the two most basic functions of an ecosystem are energy flow and nutrient cycling. The two most basic things, okay. So if you don't think of anything, use this. Other than that, you can think of many other functions: provisioning services, cultural services, aesthetic services, regulating services. All those things can be mentioned here, okay. So one is community characteristics, and then you have community characters. These are specific traits, microscopic, hence they are more detailed, okay. So if you have to understand this as well, okay, that these are the features which are exhibited and this is more detailed in nature. Fine, I hope you are able to understand this. Forest community, okay, the community characteristics, etc., that is one thing you understand. Now for both of them I will just simply show you one mind map, okay, and this will be good enough for you to understand, right? Forest community characteristics, okay, this means macro. So for our understanding we will write down macro, okay. I've just written macro so that you also understand easily. You can talk about species composition, stratification, I just told you, the level of biodiversity there, what is the stage of ecological succession, the dominance, and the trophic structure. What is trophic structure? Think about the different trophic levels in a food chain, in a pyramid, etc. We'll also talk about pyramid also. So that is one. All these things are self-explanatory. So right from the type of species, okay, so you'll have tall trees, short trees, insects. So that is the species composition. Stratification, again, shrub layer, forest floor, canopy, understory, etc. And if possible, whenever there is a question like this, draw the diagram and label this also in the stratification, canopy, understory. We've already seen this in previous lectures, right? Biodiversity, animal, plant, microbes, etc. That is going to be there. Succession stage, okay, so it can be a pioneer community, which of course we have seen the when you have mosses and let's say lichens at the very basic stage. You can have some intermediate stage, you can also have a climax community, right? That is a succession stage. Dominance, so there will be abundance because of, let's say, size, so on and so forth. So this will exert influence on the community structure and the functioning, right? So which species will dominate? You will have some predator species which can dominate. And last is trophic structure, okay? So I've told you, let's say the pyramids are arranged. So at the base you have the primary producers, and then you have different layers. That is known as trophic structure. All these are macro. They give you a bird's eye view or a more detailed perspective. Fine. Micro perspective is community characters which can be explained in easier manner in two ways: qualitative, okay, and quantitative. Quantity means you can measure it, so you can talk of population density. This is more micro. So population density for an Amazon rainforest versus for a Thar desert will be different. Biomass, again, for let's say coral reef system will be different, for Amazon will be different, for Antarctic systems will be different. Growth rate will also be different, and net primary productivity, this will also be different, right? Okay, because let's say the primary productivity of mangroves is very high, but let's say of oceans or bigger, let's say, ecosystems will be less. So this is quantitative, I can measure this quantity. Qualitative is different, right? So I can talk about trophic relationships. I'll also tell you what all these things mean. Reproductive strategies, behavioral patterns, okay? Again, in behavioral patterns, some can migrate, suspend, okay? So there are different behavioral patterns. And last is symbiotic, okay? So you know symbiotic, let's say if I talk of algae, okay? So, or basically if I talk about, let's say if symbiotic means both the organisms are benefited. So it's a plus and a plus, okay? Let's say if I talk of mycorrhiza, okay? So mycorrhiza means you have fungus which is having a symbiotic association with roots of higher plants, okay? So that is how you can relate this, okay? Right, and I was telling you, so one is this. Other than that, we'll also see examples of lichens, okay? Algae plus fungus, things like that. So this is the forest community characteristics, okay? So one by one, we'll just quickly have a look. I think this part is self-explanatory, right? So population density, biomass, growth rate, okay? So let's say here also you have some examples, for example, number of sal trees per hectare. So you can give examples and make sure, see, otherwise this particular, at least the lecture number 1 is very generic in nature. How you can differentiate is through the use of these examples. And this is the part of answer writing. You have to deliberately mention a lot of examples, okay? Biomass, okay? So here also, let's say whatever is the energy, etc. in biomass, you have to think about. Because in pyramids of biomass, etc., you already know, because in biomass you actually measure, okay, the weight of living organisms in an area, right? Growth rate also. So let's say if I'm talking of height of, let's say, teak, population growth rate, etc. So here also you can think about this whole part here. Growth rate can also be, let's say, understood. And last is net primary productivity. In all of this, try to link it to an already existing knowledge that you have. This will help you get a very good understanding, right? So when I'm talking of net primary productivity, so rate at which the plants, etc., they convert sunlight into organic substances through photosynthesis, right? So this you already know. The term is net. So one term is gross. Gross means overall. Net means when you subtract the respiration or the metabolic losses, that is known as net, okay? Now, this is quantity, you can measure it. Then you have quality. So yes, we will quickly have a look at it. So trophic relationships, so whatever is the relation between the herbivores, predators, decomposers, all the three, let's say, components of biotic, that is the trophic relationship, okay? This can vary as per ecosystems. Some ecosystems, let's say, you have terrestrial ecosystems, in that more of detritus dominates, okay? So you can think about that. Similarly, let's say you have aquatic ecosystems, you have a lot of planktons, there also the relationship might be different, right? Reproductive strategies, okay? So reproduction can be through seeds. We've seen artificial and natural regeneration. We've seen, so they can reproduce through seeds, spores, or live births, right? For example, the seed dispersal can be in case of banyan trees, Ficus benaulensis, right? Behavioral patterns. So this can be, let's say, migration. So let's say you have the Siberian crane, which moves from Siberia, parts of Russia, to Keoladeo National Park, Bharatpur, Rajasthan, right? or some are nocturnal mammals. You are, if you're writing the mains of this year forest, you already know a question on nocturnal already came this year, okay, which was related to the species found in, let's say, the portions of Nilgiri. Okay, you had Nilgiri tar, etc., in that question, right? And symbiotic, so this can be, I already told you the case of mycorrhiza, and not just mycorrhiza, there are many examples. You can think of rhizobium bacteria, and again the roots. You can think about the lichens, okay, algae plus fungus, right? So these are your, basically, again, if you see the mind map, community characters, qualitative, quantitative, and the community characteristics, okay. So sometimes even if this question is asked, if you don't know these parameters, then you will just have to cook something up, and more often than not you will not write, okay. Now you may ask, sir, how do we remember it? What at least I used to do, at least. So you can create your mnemonics, let's say SSB, okay, or anything like that. The more you repeat your mnemonics, the better. Otherwise you'll have a problem in that you have so many mnemonics but you don't know what exactly is the code for which one, and then you get confused. So that should not happen. We have discussed mnemonics like gritwit, etc. in our classes, so try to write them down. And also you can also create your own. Let's say, for example, the moment I see this, I am reminded of SSB and DST. DST is daylight saving time, and SSB can be staff selection board, etc., right? So SSB and DST, you may create something for your own understanding. Similarly for this you can also create, because sometimes this helps us to automatically generate points. The more we are able to do that, the better it is. Fine. Then from this we move to again the concepts in vegetation. Okay, so again here these two terms we've already seen: dominance, we've already seen density in the previous classes, in the previous lecture also. So again, when I'm talking of vegetation, so here also you can borrow here from these characters as well as characteristics. That is why I've told you this in detail. Okay, because this again is a very basic component of ecology. Because see, forest ecology is directly borrowing from ecology. All these you already study in ecology. Okay, so let's say if I'm talking of floristic composition, okay, which basically means abundance of plant species. So you can talk about Western Ghats is a biodiversity hotspots. How many biodiversity hotspots in India? 4. Who gave the concept? Norman Myers. Then Conservation International. What are the 2 criterias? Okay, so I think one is you have to have 1500 vascular plants as endemic, okay, and second is the area should have lost around 70% of its vegetation, or conversely speaking 30% of the vegetation should be remaining, okay. Because sometimes this question, very basic questions can also be asked from ecology, something you should ideally be knowing, okay, right? So density, dominance, these are only 2, but you already know, we have seen so many of them here. 6 here, and again 4 and 4, 8 here, okay. So 6 plus 8, 14. I know that's too much for you to remember, but again this is how you can create your difference, okay. Then one more topic is already mentioned in your syllabus is ecological succession and climax. Already the main portion, theories, etc., we've already seen that in lecture, paper 1A, okay. So you know what is the succession. So herein you have process by which ecosystems gradually develop over a period of time, okay. Within that you have pioneer succession, or pioneer means the very basic. So you have the pioneer stage, you have the intermediate stage, and lastly you have the climax stage. Climax stage is the most stable stage, right? So that is done. Within that we've already seen multiple types of succession. So one is primary and secondary. In primary you had no vegetation to begin with, you started from scratch. But in secondary, because of, let's say, some man-made activity or some issues, we had a vegetation, but because of, let's say, earthquake, forest fire, or some human activities, it was disturbed, and then it started to grow. So because of that, secondary succession used to take very less time as compared to primary. So this is one, based on the availability of vegetation. But then based on availability of water, so we have seen terms like, if you remember, xerophytic, okay, mesophytic, which is between them. So zero means very less water, okay. Then we have seen heterotrophic succession, autotrophic succession, autogenic, allogenic succession. All these things we've already discussed, okay. So try to recall that. Climax community was the final stage of succession where the forest becomes stable and mature, okay. So that was one. Now this was the question which was asked: what structural and functional changes occur in a forest ecosystem during succession? What structural changes happen and what functional changes happen, okay. Now here in the answer I have very much, let's say, because the question is asking structural things, I have made it very, very much structured. So in structural changes, I have 4 headings: composition of species, forest stratification, biomass accumulation, and habitat diversity. Now, if you look this very carefully, what I've done, I have borrowed the parameters from here, and I have analyzed all these parameters in a succession format. What is initial stage, intermediate stage, climate stage? Okay, so each of these parameters have been analyzed at the 3 levels. So when I'm talking of species composition, what is the species composition at the initial stage? Very less. Okay, so only grasses or ferns etc. can dominate. Pioneer species, think of mosses, algae. Okay, or let's say lichens etc. Intermediate, so you have small trees, the flame of the forest. What is that? Butea monosperma, it starts to appear. Climax stage, you have the mature trees like sal, Shorea robusta, okay, teak, Tectona grandis. Okay, this is a very decent example. In fact, you can also draw a diagram to show, but this is just the species composition. Forest stratification, so of course imagine how the layers of forest will come up. Initial stage, mostly ground, yes. In the intermediate state, yes, understories will develop, but in the climax stage, distinct layers will form, including canopy, understory, shrub layer, and the forest floor. Okay, so everything will be there. This is how the structure changes, right? Biomass, again, this is directly linked to species. When you have less biomass, so in the initial stage, you will have very less biomass because only grasses are there. Intermediate stage, moderate biomass, okay, and climax, high biomass, you'll have proper trees, okay, large mature trees are there, so of course you will have higher biomass. In terms of habitat diversity, okay, so here you have limited habitats, okay, for ground dwelling species, right? Intermediate, more niches are getting formed, so increased niche for birds and insects, yes. At the climax stage, you have Indian giant squirrel, so many things other in the canopy, etc., right? So you have more diversity as you move along, okay. So this is the structural and the functional part which occurs in the forest ecosystem during succession, right? The functional part is, of course, see, in functional, I told you, if you don't remember anything, remember 2 things. 1, nutrient cycling, and then energy flow. Other than that, 2 more things are there: soil development, water relations, right? So here also, you can easily understand what will happen: initial, intermediate, and climax, okay? So here, very, let's say, short-lived grasses will decompose. In intermediate stage, slow cycling will happen, okay, because let's say Indian gooseberry will, or let's say amla, which is Phyllanthus emblica, it will retain nutrients for a longer period of time. Climax stage, here at least you will have more stable and efficient recycling. You will have proper decomposition. You know that leaf litter etc. is getting decomposed, which also forms soil, you know, forest soils etc. So here, let's say banyan tree, etc. So this will take more time. It is more stable. It will have efficient nutrient cycling here. Okay. So this is also one thing that, let's say, you need to keep in mind. Then with energy flow, okay. So let's say you have again initial stage, intermediate, and climax stage. Okay. So here also, here the energy flow is very simple. And as the time moves on, there is more niche developing, and then there is more complexity that is getting added. Okay. So again, in the climax stage, you have very much intricate energy flows. You have multiple trophic levels. Okay, you have apex predators, so on and so forth. The soil development, how does that happen? So yes, again here, thin and poorly developed soil, it becomes to thicken. Again, link this with the falling leaf litter, vegetation, more growth, decomposition, adding of more nutrients to the soil, right? And again, at the climax stage, it has rich, deep soil which can support trees like the Indian rosewood. Again, this is very logical to understand. Fine. Water relations, how do they change? Okay, so here also you have initial stage. Okay, and again in the last stage, it becomes very efficient. Let's say a peepal tree. So again, proper maintenance of groundwater relations. But see how beautifully we have attempted a simple question. Otherwise, many students would only be writing 4 or 5 points. But here we have just changed the entire way to answer this question. Okay, because when I'm talking about, let's say, the structural and functional changes, we can follow this basic format. Okay, and again we can mention some of the important species as well. All right, this is there. Now this question I just want you to ponder, and this question I think everybody in the class can do, provided you have revised to paper 1A better. Okay, narrate how sustainable forestry accounts for the ecological economic, social and cultural value of forests. Okay, this you can borrow from 1B as well, agroforestry, because a term sustainable forestry is there, right? You can borrow from 1A as well. I've given you all the frameworks. All you have to do is to generate points on ecological, economic, social and cultural. Okay, and imagine this is a question of 15 marks. The better you write it, the better marks you'll get. Okay, again, if you're struggling to generate points here, go back and revisit your lectures. Again, make very handy points. Again, one more tip I have, be it 2023 mains aspirants or the aspirants of 2024, you have the lectures, you'll also get the slides and the handouts, etc. for that. But at the end of the day, it will become very bulky. So while you can revise through them, my suggestion will be for every lecture, you should have 1-page notes. And those 1 page should only have skeleton. Okay, whatever case studies, examples, or the different things I'm telling you, write only that. So for every lecture, if you have 1 page, so cumulatively you will have around 50 pages. Let's say if you have around 50 lectures overall, right? That will be very easy to revise at the very last moment. Okay. Otherwise, if you have these handouts, etc., every slide is around 550 to 70, let's say, slides. So that means around 50 into 50, you can imagine so many pages to revise, right? So that will increase your burden. Okay, so again, let's say quickly revising it. Ecological value. So let's say if I'm talking of conserving biodiversity, right? So let's say when I'm talking of Western Ghats, etc. Okay, it is home to, let's say, Malabar grey hornbill and many other species. So if you have sustainable forestry, it will actually promote the conservation of these species. Carbon sequestration, we already know, let's say Sundarban mangroves or wetlands or other different forests, they are carbon sinks. They absorb a lot of carbon dioxide and they combat climate change. Climate change should be a constant dimension in your answers. Habitat integrity. So again, let's say you have deciduous forests which have the bison. So if you have sustainable forestry, then you will not fragment these habitats, which means both the biodiversity or the species and the habitat or the system can live in integrity. So this will be undisturbed and interconnected. Again, that will be very much important for reproductivity and survival of these, let's say, portions. Then the balance of an ecosystem, right? So again, predator-prey relation will properly thrive. Otherwise, if the prey population declines or predator declines, what will happen? Ultimately, the food chain will collapse. Okay, right? So let's say Bengal tiger and a cheetal, they are properly living. So this is the ecological value. I'll quickly go through economic value. Timber production, you already know. Non-timber forest produce, let's say, honey, bamboo, and by the way, we'll see this in a lot of detail in 2B. Ecosystem services, yes, these are very much important. Again, see, whenever you write agroforestry, I'm telling you again and again, as per FAO, as per India's agroforestry policy of 2014, learn to quote the authentic sources. If you've already given your mains of UPSC, you know to quote economic survey, you know how to quote, let's say, second ARC or different commissions, law commissions, so on and so forth. Here also make it a point to quote FAO, okay, and agroforestry, even if you don't know exactly what they're saying, but the mere mention will give more weight to your answers, okay, right? Let's say integrating trees like Subabul on agricultural lands can boost income and soil health. Now this is such a, let's say, good point to quote, okay. Again, 4 basic points here. Social value, yes, community engagement, let's say tribes, or let's say the Bastar tribes in Chhattisgarh in forest management. Again, we've seen 4 or 5 tribes in tribology, okay, in paper 1B. Again, in lecture 3, I'll tell you more tribes, let's say Kani tribe, okay, and other tribes. So keep on adding these examples in your notes, right? Livelihood opportunities goes without saying, right? Better employment, NTFPs, okay, that also helps. Educational. So if these forest tours, etc., are properly organized and they are going on, so yes, it does help the students to understand. Okay, so Banyan, let's say Ficus bananensis, etc., that is also there, right? Health and well-being. So yes, let's say neem, if this is taken properly care of, so it offers medicinal, let's say, value. Okay, it is antiseptic, anti-inflammatory. It is used in a lot of Ayurvedic formulations, neem. Okay. And not just medicinal, but it also has purification and other, let's say, it also helps to combat air pollution, etc., etc. That is the social value. Cultural value is also there. Okay, so you have sacred groves. Let's say you have sacred groves of Meghalaya. And again, think of sacred groves, think of Northeast, think of Western Ghats, think of, let's say, Rajasthan. There are many communities which hold these, let's say, areas very in a lot of, let's say, religious value, spiritual value. Again, think of tribology. I've given you many examples. Traditional knowledge. So again, this traditional knowledge you will read more in lecture number 3. Okay, this in more detail in ethnobotany of 2B. Okay, so here let's say preserving and respecting knowledge about trees like let's say amla or Indian gooseberry, Phyllanthus emblica. Okay, and with this you can combat vitamin C or scurvy deficiency, right? Cultural festivals. So of course, let's say you are celebrating Van Mahotsav, okay, which are basically forest centric festivals. And again, heritage sites. So they can have some cultural landmarks, etc., people, etc., which is there. So all of this can contribute to a lot of, let's say, proper thriving. Okay, just give me a moment. I'll just have a sip of water. Okay. Fine. So I think this portion should be clear to you. And again, questions like this help you to recall a lot of portions which you've already done. Fine. That was my whole objective. Now, again, one more component which is mentioned is response to these, let's say, stresses. Okay. So there are different responses. Let's say one is regulate, one is conform, one is migrate, one is suspend. Okay. I will just go through all of them. Regulate, by that, okay, you can regulate, you can conform, you can migrate and suspend. First of all, remember all the 4 directly mentioned in your NCERT. Okay. Second, when they ask you what are types of adaptations, try to write in this manner. Structural, again, this is from your NCERT. Structural, physiological, behavioral. Behavioral means what is the behavior, okay, which can be hibernation or migration. Migration you've already seen. Physiological means a part or a body part, the function which is provided. So, okay, let's say snake is making a venom. Okay, so it is the job of that body part. Physiologically means function. And structural, okay, so again a body part or a coloring that helps you. This you can think of camouflage. So again, let's say you have green colored shrubs. The insect can just camouflage itself to protect itself from getting killed. Okay, so here this also is done by, let's say, army to not get caught. Okay, so camouflage, etc. So one is structural level adaptation, one is physiological, and one is behavioral. Okay, and there are 4 terms: regulate, conform, migrate, suspend. I'll quickly go through them. Most of this you have already seen in good detail in your basic prelims. Okay, when I say regulate, what to be regulate? So who can regulate the body temperature? So there will be 2 kind of species, right? I'll just quickly, because this is, I think you have already seen this many times. So one, you have warm blooded, and then you have cold blooded. We, let's say the human, or let's say mammals or the birds, they are warm blooded, which means they're able to regulate their body temperature. And the ability to regulate the body temperature is known as homeostasis. Stasis means constant. Okay, homeostasis means constancy of internal temperature. So even if it is cold or hot, the temperature is normal. How? When it is cold, you will shiver, you will generate heat. When it is hot, you will sweat. Okay, so based on that, or perspiration, etc. So you will again maintain the constant temperature. But this only the mammals and basically birds, etc., some species can do. But almost all the other, let's say, animals and plants, they are cold blooded. They are not able to regulate their body temperatures, right? So I hope you're able to understand regulate. What is regulate? And again, success of mammals is largely due to the ability to maintain a constant body temperature. That is one thing you have to remember here. Okay, this is homeostasis. You don't have to remember all this conformer, regulator, but just know that regulators have a constant internal temperature. That is why this line is let's say parallel, whereas conformers, so if you increase the temperature, they will also increase. So they are just conforming to the external circumstances. Okay, so that is one way, let's say, in which you can, let's say, analyze this. Okay, now here I will also tell you few things. For example, there are few rules that I will tell you. Okay, this also is very much important. You should be aware about it. Okay, again, I told you 99% of all these animals and nearly all plants cannot maintain a constant temperature. That is one. Okay, again, a question which also often pops up: why small animals are not found in polar regions, and why do you find big animals? Everything is related to heat loss. Heat loss is actually a function of your body size. Smaller the body size, the greater is the surface area, the more energy is lost as opposed to what is consumed. So you do not find small animals, etc., because they will lose out more energy than what they can gain. Okay, so that is one. Small animals, etc. Migration, of course, I will not explain this in too much detail. You already know Siberian crane, etc. Whenever there is a stressful condition, the species will move out to a better, let's say, area. for some period of time. Again, if the condition changes, they will again come back. This is migration. Okay. I gave you the example of Siberian crane, which often goes to Kyoladev, which is a very famous site. Then there's a term known as suspend. In suspend, just remember, again, by the way, suspend you can easily understand, okay, and connect with dormancy. You know that seed dormancy you have already read about. How can we also activate seed dormancy and how can you stop seed dormancy, right? Suspend is that you reduce your metabolic rate so that you have very less consumption of energy. You do not require too much of energy, okay? How can you do that? You will have thick wall spore formation. You have very spores which are formed. There is more dormancy, okay? So here also there is a reduction of metabolic activity which happens, which against all of these things increases your chances of survival. And by your, I mean, of course, here it can be microorganisms like bacteria, fungus. Here it can be, let's say, plants. Then there are two more terms, hibernation and aestivation. And then there is diapause. Diapause is for zooplanktons. See, you have planktons, marine microscopic organisms. One is phytoplanktons, plants which produce food, which are eaten up by zooplanktons. Okay. So that is one. So diapause, pause means to stop, suspend. Okay. Two terms are there, easily you can understand, hibernation and aestivation. Hibernation, if you've seen a lot of movies, documentaries, etc., cartoons, you know that the bear goes to hibernation during winters. So hibernation, if you see the image also, is a characteristics in winters, in which what happens, the organism will try to reduce its energy intake. They will not go out, they will not hunt as much, they will mostly sleep. So again, this helps them to survive very harsh winters. In aestivation, all you need to know, this is to avoid damage from higher temperatures in summer, etc. Fine, that is one. Again, because we are discussing what are the different, let's say, adaptations are there. Again, we have also discussed in biomes, etc. In desert, let's say you have animals and you have plants. So let's say you have shallow, widespread roots. Okay, again, this will help you have better water. Spikes, again, to reduce evapotranspiration. Large, fleshy stems, again, to reduce evapotranspiration, thick waxy skin, all these will facilitate that. Again, you can also think about the opening and closing of stomata or sunken stomata. All this is there to ensure that very harsh conditions they are able to survive. Same is the case with animals. They can have a hump, a wide feet, again, so that there is a proper contact in a surface area, so that they are also able to move, camouflage, fur, and again you can think of polar bear. So plants and animals, they have a lot of modifications to be able to survive in harsh conditions. Okay. Otherwise, camel, etc., because camel you has to survive and they can drink multiple gallons of water and they can survive for long stretches without even then taking up water. Okay. Again, similarly, there are adaptation. Let's say if we talk about, let's say kangaroo rat, etc. So they have very concentrated urine. Why? They want to conserve water. And again, the fat is oxidized. That generates energy and that is how they are able to survive. Okay. Now there are few rules. Again, some of them are already mentioned in your NCERT, but then these are basic ecological principles. I'll quickly go through them. Not very difficult to understand. In fact, Allen's rule is one of the easiest. You might have seen this in your books as well. What is Allen's rule? And again, I'll go through all the rules also. Allen's rules is that, let's say these are tropical or different area species. Here the ears are long, whereas in Arctic, in cold conditions, the ear limbs are short. Again, what is the reason? To minimize the heat loss. So Allen rules, what it says, animals in cold climate have minimum exposed surface area. Okay, short legs, short ears. This is your Allen's rule. Now let us go through all the rules. Bergman's rule, Jordan, Glogger's and Wrench rule. Okay. And after that, there are few things related to ecological. There are three more rules. Okay. And then of course we move almost to the end of our topic. Okay. So if I see, so one is Bergman rule. Okay. So here when we are saying, let's say polar bears are larger in colder regions. You already know why. And brown bears which are found in warm areas, they are small. So what does the rule say? That species of large sizes are found in colder environments and species of smaller sizes are found in warmer. I hope you're able to link this and understand why. Okay, this is Bergman's rule. Okay, the moment you understand this, that is how you'll remember it. Allen's rule, we've already seen this. Then there is Jordan's rule. So here this is linked to fishes. Okay, so fishes or fish species which are present in northern okay, waters have more vertebra than the species in tropical. Tropical waters are warmer in nature. So what we have seen, the fish species in the northern waters have more vertebrae as compared to the species in tropical waters. Okay, so that is one. Glogger's rules will tell you the dark pigmentation increases in the species of warmer and more humid climate. Okay, so let's say you have birds in tropical rainforests, etc. They are darker than those in arid regions, etc. This you can also understand that dark pigment is more in warmer climates. Fine. Wrench rule, what is that? So here also, let's say you have birds of prey. Again, as the size or the species size increases, the size difference between males and the females becomes more pronounced. Okay, so this is also there, that in some cases where the size of male is larger than the female. Okay, so basically highlighting that there can be some size dimorphism as well. Okay, so you don't have to go into a lot of detail here, just maybe the keywords, etc. you can write down in your notes. Okay, so if there is an increase of, let's say, average size, the size dimorphism also increases. Okay, and conversely, size dimorphism decreases with the increase of this, let's say, size. Okay, if the females are larger. So in one case you have the males which are larger, in one case females are larger, and then this rule applies. Fine. Allen's rule we have already seen. Now again a term which is also mentioned, can be asked again, what is ecological amplitude? Okay, if you see two diagrams here, amplitude in general, if you talk about physics, it will tell you the range. And here also think about warm-blooded and cold-blooded. Okay, I told you urihaline or stenohaline, or think about eurythermal and stenothermal. Uri means a big range in which they can survive. Okay, so if they can survive in a long range, then it has a long or a wide tolerance. If you can see here, this is a big range, this is a very small range. So here if I say species 1 has a larger ecological amplitude. By the way, ecological amplitude was also asked by in the IFS mains exam. So here also please put a star mark. So what we are discussing? We are saying ecological amplitude, and please draw two diagrams. In one, show a big range and highlight 1 and 2 and show that 1 has a bigger ecological amplitude. What is ecological amplitude? It is basically the range within which a species can tolerate ecological changes. A range within which the species can tolerate ecological changes. Now, I've also added 3 more terms. This usually I teach in let's say prelims crash courses as well. Ecophene, ecotype, and ecospecies. Okay, this you can just quickly go through the explanation. Again here, what is basically the idea? If you draw ecophene, in middle you'll have ecotype, and here you'll have ecospecies. So if you think of ecophene, here only temporary changes will happen. Okay, so basically see, there are phenotype changes in the phenotype and in the genotype. Okay, when you complete your tree breeding, that is in paper 1B, then you will understand this better. But basically, if you are subjecting a species to a temperature change, so I'm just drawing a spectrum here. If there are very temporary or very minute changes, it becomes ecophene. If there are extreme changes, which means everything changes permanently, which means genetic level changes, okay, which are not temporary, they are permanent and they are irreversible, that means you have a ecospecies. So on one side of the spectrum you have ecophene, and on the opposite side you have ecospecies, and again in middle you have ecotype. I hope you understand, because you are subjecting a species to a range of temperature. If you have very small range of temperature and for a very short time, you will have temporary changes which are reversible, and on the opposite side, on the most extreme side, you will have irreversible permanent changes. Okay, so 3 more terms, ecophene, ecotype, because they have a habit of sometimes asking you some important terms. Okay, so again I don't want you people to be to fall behind. Okay, and again, because we have discussed ecological amplitude, 3 more laws are there, very easy to understand. Okay, maybe the name might look fancy, but conceptually you can understand all the 3. Okay, so you have this Liebig's law of the minimum, you have Blackman's law of limiting factors, okay, and then you have the Shelford's law of tolerance. Okay, so here basically, let's say if you have the Liebig's law of minimum, okay, so here again remember that the growth is controlled not by how much or what is the total amount of resources available, but by the scarcest resource or the limiting factor. Okay, this you can also understand, right? So let's say if a plant requires sunlight, water, nitrogen to grow, and it is getting water and let's say sunlight, but nitrogen is limited, then the growth will be restricted because of lack of nitrogen, regardless of how abundant the other two factors are. So again, this also, let's say you can imagine that whatever is the scarcest resource will also define. Okay, second is limiting factors also. Okay, so here also this is slightly similar to this one, but there's a small change. So here also, when a process is influenced by many or let's say several factors, its rate is limited by the pace of the slowest factor, okay, and not necessarily the scarcest one. Okay, so here also, even if there is ample sunlight, okay, but the temperature, if it is very low, the rate of the photosynthesis will be limited by the temperature and not by the intensity of light. Okay, so a minor change is there. So here this is the law of limiting factor, which tells you that it is the pace, at what pace is the slowest photo, even if it is scarce, but between that, what is the pace of it. Okay, so this is a slight more nuanced one, as let's say we talk about Liebig's law of minimum and Blackman's law of limiting factors, right? Again, all these are ecological principles. Fine, these 5 were also these principles which is let's say found in various habitat. Okay, so you should be knowing about it. That's why let's say we are discussing it. Okay, and then you have Shelford's law of tolerance. Okay, so here also what you need to know, let's say if coral reefs thrive in a specific temperature range, okay, you know that let's say in the tropical waters roughly around 22 to 25 degrees Celsius is good for them. Okay, now if this range falls above or falls below because of global warming, climate change, ocean acidification, this will lead to the bleaching of corals. Okay, so here there is a law of tolerance, which is directly what you read in ecological amplitude. The moment you go beyond this range, the species will not be able to survive. Okay, so again a fancy term can be Shelford's law of tolerance. So I hope you now would not be taken aback when you see these kind of terms. Okay, so that is one. Again, a previous question that was asked, I don't think it is going to be that difficult. Describe the various physiological mechanisms underlying drought resistance 1, drought tolerance 2, and drought avoidance in forest species. Okay, so here also I've just let's say outlined few of these, many in fact not few, many of these things we've already seen in paper 1A. Okay, so let's say drought resistance is, again, if there's a drought, but still let's say the forest species is able to have its structure and also follow its functions. So what will happen? Okay, so some of the terms, again, if you don't remember anything, I think 3 terms I've already told you. 3 things will always be let's say in your answers. 1, root, 2nd, stomata, and 3rd is osmotic balance. Here also, okay, 1 maybe the protein part is extra here. So let's say osmotic adjustment has to happen. Okay, so there are different, let's say, sugars and salts, etc. Okay, so this presence of this, or let's say you have a term known as cells turgidity, etc. Okay, the turgor, etc. So even if you have low water availability, but if you have solutes properly, okay, so then also you can maintain a proper balance. So osmotic adjustment has to happen, 1. 2nd, there need to be some protective proteins, okay, which can be heat shock proteins, 1, or dehydrins. The main function is that they protect these cellular structures from damage, because let's say if you have dehydration, okay, again the water balance will be very much, let's say, compromised. So to protect that, you have dehydrins from dehydration. Think of dehydrins and think of heat shock proteins. Okay, if you have these, if these protective proteins are present, the impact will be very less. And then stomata regulation has to happen. Let's say if you have Azadi Rakhta Indica, etc. Okay, it has the ability, okay, opening and closing the stomata at proper times. Deep root systems, let's say you have shisham, okay, again you can think of banyan, etc. If they are having very extensive and deep roots, that is going to be very much helpful. So this is going to be there. Again, when you think of, let's say, drought tolerance, what can be there? So the cell wall elasticity, if it is elastic, 1 second, yeah, if it is elastic, it will be able to withstand a lot of mechanical stress. Okay, elasticity is that property. If you're subjecting it to stress, again it is able to recover. Fine. Okay, so because of why? Because of dehydration, and then 1 second. Right. Okay, and then this happens without rupturing, right? Leaf shedding, etc. So you already know this part. I've already explained to you that when you have deciduous trees, they have a specific season for shedding their leaves, and the reason is that they want to reduce the water loss. Okay, let's say you write, and when you write deciduous, do mention, let's say, mahogany, etc. That can be there. Tissue hardening, etc. So if the trees can modify the tissue, etc., they can make it less susceptible to damage. This can also happen, right? You can have some recovery mechanisms. Okay, let's say you have post drought, etc. So you have banyan tree, Ficus benalensis. Okay, it has a ability to repair itself. Now this can also help. So let's say it is able to repair and regenerate the tissues. Nothing like it. So this can also happen. And last is the case of drought avoidance. Okay, so here let's say if I'm talking of early maturation or leaf orientation, so many things. Okay, so sometimes if early maturation, etc. happens, okay, so sometimes the trees complete their life cycle before the onset of the dry season. Okay, the dry season is supposed to come in and they will do early maturation. The whole idea is to ensure seed production in the favorable condition, so they can avoid drought. Okay, orientation of leaf, etc. So this can also change. Again, the whole idea is to reduce evapotranspiration. This term has to be written in your answers. Okay, reduce evapotranspiration. Think of water storage also. Yes, water storage can also be a very handy component. Okay, so storage of, let's say, this can also, let's say, this boab. Okay, so it is able to store a lot of water, and this is very much handy during drought, because during drought this is one, let's say, component which is the least available, right? So this also helps. Then people, etc., they can transport water from very deep soil. Again, think of xylem and phloem. Again, xylem is the one which is doing the transport part of it. Okay, to the upper drier layers at night, benefiting themselves. This is known as hydraulic lift. Okay, in this one question I have told you 12 points. Okay, by the way, this is a previous question. You might not be able to write this in as much detail, but still this will help you think about how to answer questions. Fine. Again, questions like this, and now if you know the content, if you get a question on forest soils or agroforestry or paper 1A, wherever applicable, try to use this content. Okay, that is the whole idea of discussing these questions with you. Okay, then a very small topic, I think this everybody would now know, mutualism, competition, which is population interaction. So sometimes they even ask you with examples, population interaction. Okay, so species 1, species 2, this most of you who have cleared the exam would know. Mutualism is plus plus, both are benefited. Competition is minus minus, both are negatively harmed. Predation, one is positive, one is negative. Parasitism, one is positive, one is negative. And then commensalism, one is positively impacted, other is unharmed. Similarly, amensalism, one is negatively impacted and one is unharmed. What I will just quickly go through the examples here. What you should do in just one part of the paper, do a table like this. If you remember, excellent. But then what if you don't remember? Just write the name of the species or the examples I'm giving you. Okay, and I'm just quickly going through all the examples, right? And again, you can make a list of positive interactions as well as the negative interactions. Okay, that will help you a lot. Again, the easiest case of let's say mutualism is pollination of flowers. 1. Second is lichens, algae plus fungus. 2. Third is coral species, coral polyps and zooxanthellae. 4th, mycorrhiza, fungus and the roots of higher plants. 5th, rhizobium, bacteria and roots of higher plants. 6th, fig, wasp and tree. Okay. 7th can be orchid and this pollinator, right? Commensalism is plus and 0. Example can be suckerfish remora, okay, which is attaching itself to a shark. Shark has no impact. They are positively impacted. Okay, why? Because they will eat up the remains of what is there and other animals will not attack it seeing this big shark. Second is these epiphytes. This is also a case of commensalism. Epiphytes use the structure for support, but they do not take nutrition. Okay, remember this. Whereas the tall tree does not get any benefit. Okay, simple example, 2 example, epiphytes, suckerfish remora attaching it to a shark. Competition, again, remember, let's say you have a limited resource which is being eaten up by a lot of, let's say, grazing herbivore, etc. In competition, remember, both are negatively impacted. Okay, Parasitism, now here you can think of three cases: ectoparasites, endoparasites, and brood parasitism. Ecto means inside the body, so think of nematodes, okay, protozoa, etc., which are there, different round worms, etc., in the body. Ectoparasites, which means outside, so you can think of ticks, mites, spiders, insects, all this, okay, these are ecto, okay. And third was brood parasitism. Here I can give you an example of, let's say, cuckoo quail. So let's say this is a nest wherein the main species is nurturing the eggs, okay, but what happens, cuckoo places its egg here. After some time the egg grows, it displaces this egg, so this egg falls down, so the main species is negatively harmed, okay, whereas cuckoo is here positively benefited, so plus minus. Predation, very easy to understand. Let's say you have a prey and a predator. Oh, please pardon me, this is your predator, positively impacted, prey negatively impacted, okay. We've seen so many of these examples, right? And last is amensalism. Amensalism is minus and zero. One example, very famous one, is penicillium, okay. Again, here you can also write down allelopathy, okay. Allelopathy is also, let's say, the secretions which are very much negative to some the outside. Let's say there is a animal or there is something which is going to eat, so these are the secretions which ward off the harmful predators, etc. Antibiosis, here example is the penicillium has antibacterial properties, so it will secrete antibacterial compounds. These compounds will negatively impact the bacteria, but it has no impact on the penicillin. This is one. Second example is this, a big tree and a small tree. Because the small tree is negatively impacted by the big tree, because it is not getting any sunlight, it is just shade. And now you're students of forestry, you know shade bearing, shade loving, okay, all these kind of terms. So one is this, and this does not have any impact because of the small one. So this can also be a part here, okay. And the last topic, which is a very small topic, is ecological pyramids. Again, I'm not going to explain this too much. You have already done this tens of times, okay. What is pyramid? It is a graphical representation. But why I'm telling you this, because a question on this has already been asked, okay. These are graphical representations of different organisms in an ecosystem. This is how the pyramids are. Pyramids are of three types: pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass, pyramid of energy. Pyramid of numbers and biomass are both upright and inverted, but pyramid of energy is only upright, it is unidirectional. Pyramid of numbers upright is the general, and again, if possible, draw a diagram here. Grasses, grasshoppers, producers, herbivore, this is how the arrangement is there, but this can also be inverted. So if you think about, let's say, a tree can be a case of inverted pyramid of numbers, okay. So you have one tree, on that you have herbivores, parasites, and hyperparasites. In pyramid of biomass, of course, it can be upright, but it can be inverted also. Inverted in case of aquatic ecosystems, because if you measure the weight of, let's say, planktons, phytoplanktons, these will be very, while they're too many number, but weight wise they are very less, they are very microscopic. So this will be inverted, pyramid of biomass. Pyramid of energy, I told you, because the energy will flow from producers to the top consumer, right? So it will be unidirectional, okay. So this is how this flow of energy is going to happen. And so yes, it will be upright, always upright, unidirectional. And again, 10% of energy is only transmitted from one trophic level to the other, which means 90% is lost. Why? Because of metabolic, let's say, losses and respirational losses, okay. So again, this is something which you also have to think about, okay. It reflects, energy pyramid reflects the proper law of thermodynamics, okay. So that is one thing. These are only 10% efficient, okay. This also is something we already know, okay. Again, there are limitations of pyramid, and again, and then I will tell you this question, okay. The limitations of pyramid are basically that it does not take into account the same species. So if there is a species which can exist in 2 or more levels, and this can happen because in environment things are interconnected, they are very complex, but pyramids try to reduce or oversimplify the ecological phenomena, okay, which is not a great practice. Second, it assumes a simple food chain which does not exist. It does not accommodate a food web. And third, of course, saprophytes, etc., or these decomposers are not given proper role here in the pyramid, while they actually perform a very important role in the real world, okay. So that is one thing that you have to understand in the limitations of pyramid, okay. Now see, the question was, what are ecological pyramids? Everybody can answer. Explain different types. This also you can answer. Mention the implications of ecological pyramids, understanding the forest ecosystem. This is where I come in. So there are few things. I will just go through that. Okay. Okay. So it will help you give me the insights on food chain. Okay. So for example, you have sal tree. It can be a primary producer which feeds herbivores like sambar deer, which is preyed upon. So basically, how the food chain will propagate this, it will tell me simple point. Energy movement, it will tell me. Okay. So how energy will move from one level to the other. Let's say the energy captured by the banyan tree through photosynthesis, okay, is much more than what the herbivores is eating. Now this is where the 10% rule comes in. Energy movement. Third, weight of life, biomass. Okay. So this also, let's say you have the combined weight of producers like Tectona is way more than the weight of herbivores. This is also true because we are just utilizing what we have read in proper points. Then protection of top dwellers. Okay. So as you know, as you move up, you will have very limited organisms. You will have too many producers, but very few top carnivores, etc. Okay. Leopard or eagle, which also tells you that we have to conserve the species also at the top. Okay. So this also talks about or explains to you the protection of top dwellers. Okay. These are healthy check for forests. So again, if you have a proper balanced pyramid, this also helps. Otherwise, let's say the predator is lost. Again, you will have too many of the prey. They will eat on too much of grass. Again, there will be a disbalance. Okay. So if you notice very less people trees or too many herbivores or not enough predators, anything, this is a sign that the forest is facing a lot of issues. All right. Now to end this, I will end this with one more question. I think the question is slightly different, but again the primary productivity etc. is mentioned in your syllabus. I'm including it, but this also is related to pollution, which we have already covered in 1B. So there will be some overlap. This will hardly take 1 or 2 minutes. We'll quickly go through it. The growth and productivity of forest plants is affected by different types of air pollutant. What are those? Suggest remedies. So here I have mentioned, let's say sulfur dioxide. It can cause leaf chlorosis. See the terms. It can cause necrosis, reduced photosynthesis, and prolonged exposure can cause premature leaf drop. Fine. It is asking remedies. So for each point, I've also mentioned the remedies here. Okay. So remedies, let's say install flue gas desulfurization units to reduce sulfur emissions. Use low sulfur fuels. You can also mention, let's say BS6, etc. Okay. Now NOx. So here also leaf spotting, reduced growth, soil acidification, nutrient uptake is less. Notice the keywords here. What you can do? Catalytic converters, NOx, this also you've read in prelims. Green transportation methods, electric vehicles, green fuels, green hydrogen fuel, etc. etc. Ozone, this is also important. So ozone can cause leaf stippling, bronzing. Okay. Reduced photosynthetic rates weakens the tree and it makes them more susceptible to your disease and pest. Okay. Implement strict vehicle emission standards. This also is a problem here. Okay. Promote public transportation. Okay. Carpooling, etc. to reduce the number of vehicles on the roads. Okay. This also is a problem. Again, you have particulate matter, volatile organic compounds, ammonia, and heavy metals like cadmium. So there are many points. In most of them, of course, let's say PM, if the PM is going to deposit, so the stomata will be blocked. So how will you then conserve water, etc.? So transpiration will be affected. Photosynthesis will also be impacted. Okay. Sunlight penetration, this is a problem. What can you do? Clean technologies, afforestation, urban green spaces as natural air filters. Okay. Volatile organic compounds, etc. So here also they contribute to formation of ground level ozone. Okay. If you read about ozone pollution, it is the VOCs, again in the presence of sunlight, and the NOx, you find ground level ozone. This is actually a pollutant, whereas the stratosphere level ozone is actually good, right? What you can do, you can use low VOC or VOC free products. Okay. In ammonia, ammonia can cause acidification, can cause nutrient imbalance also. So what you can do? Efficient manure management practices in agriculture. This will limit the release of ammonia. 1. Air scrubbers can be used. Okay. Air scrubbers in general is a very good point. And last is heavy metals. The contamination and accumulation of heavy metals can cause issues. Okay. Toxicity, soil pollution, etc. Root growth and nutrient uptake will also be damaged because of this, right? This can be toxic, this can reduce growth, right? What you can do, proper regulation of industrial emissions, wastewater discharge can be done. Phytoremediation, again, this is a good point. Phyto means plants. You know, bioremediation, you use microorganisms. Phytoremediation, you use plants, okay? Which can be used, okay, in these cases, okay, to remove these metals, right? So broadly speaking, we have covered the main topics which are mentioned, at least here in lecture number 1, okay? I'll just quickly, let's say, help you recap what all we've done. I think we've done the biotic, abiotic, ecosystems, community concepts, vegetation, ecological succession climax, primary productivity, nutrient cycling, physiology, stress, drought, water, salinity, all these points we've understood. Okay. Again, the points which you have seen in drought, you can again modify them in alkalinity and salinity. Nothing fancy, right? So most of these terms we've seen, we started with the levels of organization, biotic, abiotic factors, right? We saw a lot of previous questions also here. Forest community here, community characteristics and community characters was very important, because see, if you remember the parameters, you can write your answer. Again, that is why I'm only focus on the keywords if you're going to write your mains very shortly, okay? These things we understood, concepts, ecological succession, and in that, this also is a very good answer if you are, let's say, looking at it. Then sustainable forestry, again, we saw ecological, economic, social, cultural value. Adaptations, we understood. Then we saw migration, suspend, hibernation. We saw different rules. This may be something you have to just revise once. And you may also have to revise ecological amplitude. And these 3 rules also not very difficult to understand. Then we saw physiological mechanisms for drought resistance, tolerance, and drought avoidance. Okay. These things we had already seen. Population interactions, positive, negative. So a lot of examples also here we see. Pyramids, a previous question on pyramid. How do they help you understand the forest ecosystem? Growth of different types of pollutants, etc. So this is where we end. Now I meet you in lecture 2, which is very important, related to taxonomy, herbarium, arborata. And in lecture 3, I will talk to you about ethnobotany. Okay. So till then, please keep revising. I'll meet you very shortly. All the very best. Thank you.